We say it every week, but I'm going to say it here again. I just love this book. Today, as we continue our reread and pursuit of theories into A Court of Wings and Ruin, find a seat or perch on the edge of it, grab a delicious beverage, and join us as we brace for emotional impact this time. Today, we will be experiencing the inner circle plus Lucien and the sisters as they research, revel, rush, and rigorously train through various skill sets before the High Lords. From fear of fights, flights, and festering fools in Valaris, the balancing act of living while preparing for a war where all hope should be won. Let's get into it.
Okay. This episode, 24 through 29. Okay. Oh, this is when Farah decides that despite not having any actual flying lessons, she's going to winnow into the air above the House of Wind and attempt to just like glide down onto a balcony. Like, come on, Farah. Literally couldn't have a training lesson the previous day because she didn't have enough muscles to even hold up her wings. But no, today we are going to be able to glide. Somehow glide onto a balcony. But you have to give her props that she's doing it on her own, and it is just like jumping, literally, feet and head first at the same time with the amount of trees that she's run into in this set of chapters. But have to admire that, but good grief, woman. She is struggling hardcore when it comes to these flying lessons. But yes, she does winnow above the highest balcony. And she says, I figured this was a good time as any to practice flying. Okay. So I summoned wings and then fell 20 feet onto hard stone. Sounds lovely.
My knees ached for hers.
Right?
I felt
Ugh.
it in my bones.
Okay, so she has gone up to the House of Wind to visit her sisters because they are still at the moment staying up at the House of Wind. She does walk over to Elaine, and Elaine is out of her room for the first time. Elaine is in the family library with Nezda, but Elaine is sitting in front of a large window looking out over the city of Alaris. Fair walks over to her, asks, what are you looking at? And Elaine's response is, I can see so very far now, all the way to the sea. And Fair was like, yeah, you can kind of see the Sidra running into the sea in the very, very like distant horizon, but it's not super close. So that's our first little hint that maybe Elaine can see something that that everyone else isn't quite seeing. She can see something else. And then I love this part. She says, I can hear your heartbeat if I listen carefully. I can hear her heartbeat too. So she's talking about Nezda and Farah. She can hear both heartbeats. Farah knows that this is just the enhanced hearing of the Fae to an extent and says you can learn to drown that out because she'd had to learn that on her own because no one in the Spring Court ever helped her control her magic or learn after she turned Fae. And she wonders for a second if Nezda can hear it as well and if the two of them are just like laying in bed in the rooms next to each other, just listening to each other's heartbeats. But she's not going to ask Nezda because even if she does, Nezda probably won't even say anything. And then Elaine goes so far as to say, I can hear the sea, even at night, even in my dreams, the crashing sea, and the screams of a bird made of fire. So this is the first time we get mention of a bird made of fire. We're going to learn later on exactly what and who the bird made of fire is, but this is the first time we get a bird made of fire. Farah tells her there's a garden at the townhouse, and Elaine's response is, well, I hear the earthworms writhing through the soil or the stretching of roots. And then she says, will the bird of fire come to sit in the trees and watch me? So at this point, Farah isn't quite sure what's going on with Elaine. Everyone just kind of assumes she's crazy in this set of chapters. They're going to try and get a healer to look at her to ascertain if there was any damage done in her head when she changed from being human to Fae. They're going to bring Lucien in to see if he can kind of test out a mate bond, if he can feel anything on the other side of her mental shields. So they're going to try a couple different things to figure out if Elaine is okay. We'll kind of walk through that as we get there. But at the moment, everyone just kind of assumed she's gone a little crazy or she's not quite right in the head at this point. Something happened in the cauldron that is affecting her to that level. And because of that, when she goes back to just looking out the window, Nezda and Farah both kind of look at the window to see if it's possible to open the window because they want to make sure she's not going to open it and fall and or jump. because no one's quite sure what's going on with Elaine. And honestly, I'd really like one of the future books to be about Elaine so we get some of her perspective, because I think after doing this reread, I'm trying to understand her perspective a little bit more. And I feel like there's a lot we don't get since this is all from Feyre's perspective. Nesda does tell us that Elaine has been talking in half riddles all day. This isn't anything new to right now. This has been going on all day. Nesda and Feyre kind of go off into a secluded section of the family library just to talk to the two of them. So Feyre does put a bubble around them so Elaine can't hear them. Nesda asks Feyre if she has powers like me. And Feyre wants to respond with, well, what exactly powers do you even have, Nesta? Because you won't talk about those. But she doesn't ask that. Instead, she says, I don't know. She says it might be something, the first signs of something manifesting, but we don't know for sure. And then she thinks in her head, perhaps if you had told us a little bit more as to what happened when you were in the cauldron, we'd have a better judge. But she knows, based on what Nez said in the past, that Nez is not going to be willing to talk about it. So they decide they're not going to do anything at that point because Feyre and most of the inner circle, as well as Nezda and Amryn, are all going to be going to the Hewn City that evening. So they don't have time to try and figure anything out with Elaine. They decide they're going to kind of discuss it later on. But they're at least happy that she left the room. So as they're kind of talking in their own little bubble, I think it's interesting because Feyre does bring up training with Cassian. We find out that Cassian has asked Nesda multiple times if she will train with him, and she has declined every single time. And her response is, well, why do I have to train with him? Why not the other one? And then she goes to ask, well, why do I have to train at all? I'm not a warrior, nor do I desire to be. And Feyre says, well, it could make you strong. And Nezda's response is, there are many forms of strength beyond the ability to wield a blade and end lives. And she says, Amryn told me that yesterday. So I love that she and Amryn are starting to have this relationship to an extent. It's kind of more of a teacher student relationship, but it is an understanding of what the other person is or what is lurking beneath the other one's skin that's kind of bonded Nesta and Amryn. And then Nesta ends it with, why bother when somebody else could do all of this for me? Feyre says, well, don't you want to kill your own enemies? And Nesta's like, why? Why when I can just have somebody else do it for me? Such a difference in character between Nezda just saying, oh, well, somebody else can do it for me, and Feyre saying, no, I want to be able to do it myself.
Which is interesting when you think on it, being that we've already gotten this said multiple times. She took something from the cauldron. So the first enemy, so to speak, we see her face, she did fight for herself. And now her mindset, all right, well, why not make someone else do it for me? Get someone else to finish it.
Exactly. Right?
Interesting shift now that we're starting to know she's coming into some power.
And it makes me wonder, like, is this just from when they initially had money and were growing up? Is this kind of Nezda falling back into who she was then before they lost their wealth and then gained their wealth back again? Like, is that how she was back then? And she only is willing to fight when it actually happens and isn't ready to prepare for something to happen. I don't know. We'll get more of her throughout this book and into the next book. So we'll see. While they're in their bubble, Lucien comes into the library and is surprised to actually find Elaine outside of her room. And he's actually excited too that she is out. Feyre not wanting to interrupt them, but wanting to gauge Lucien's intentions during all of this because they've talked about do they trust Lucien or not. At this point, they're not quite sure. So they're going to see what he does over the next couple of days, next couple of weeks to gauge whether or not they can trust him completely or if they have to kind of hold stuff back from him. So Feyre stays in her little bubble with Nezda and decides that she's going to slip into Lucien's mind. She does see Elaine from his perspective, which is very similar to how Feyre sees her. She's not eating a whole lot. She's very thin. Her skin is a little paler than it should be. She doesn't look healthy or as healthy as she should. She's definitely dealing with some trauma. While in Lucien's mind, Lucien thinks through the differences between Elaine, who is now his mate, versus Jasminda, who was the woman that he loved that his brothers and father killed. comparing the two, saying Jasminda was all laughter and mischief, she was wild and free, and that she just kind of pulled Lucien into all of her crazy chaos and wild and free spirit, whereas Elaine is completely different. He doesn't know Elaine very well at this point, so he can't judge her character or the type of person that she is, but he does kind of say that she was chosen for him as his mate and just kind of thrown at him, and he's not quite sure how to handle it or what to do. Plus, he's in a whole new environment, being in the night court, where it's not really as bad as what that he'd been led. So he's in a completely different space than he's ever been, dealing with challenges that he's never even considered having to deal with. But he just kind of observing what's happening around her, that there's a teacup there, most likely from Bethesda. Do you mind if I help myself to the other one? But he doesn't really engage her in conversation a whole lot. I like that we get a little bit of information on what he thinks of Reese and the inner circle, that Reese has fantastic interior design instincts, is essentially what he's saying, that he's decorated the place very well, and that the inner circle, the people who Farron now claimed were her new family, it was the type of circle and relationship, the type of court that he thought he would get with Tamlin in the spring court, which I love getting to see that Lucien has finally found a court that has that camaraderie that he didn't have in the spring court. And we saw it. We saw it all through book 1 and through book 2 and the beginning of book 3. It was a hierarchy. Tamlin was at the top, and if you didn't follow, then tough. That's just how it was. This is completely different with Rhysand, and there is an ache like a blow to the chest that went through him when he thinks of Tamlin's court, because he does still care for Tamlin and the spring court, but it never became what he thought or what he wanted it to be. She does finally turn to him and ask who he is. He explains, he gives her his name, and that he is the 7th son of the High Lord of Autumn. And her response is to say his name and then say from my sister's story, her friend. That's how she initially remembers him. And he says yes, and then she blinks again and says, "Oh, but you were in Highburn. You betrayed us." And his response is, "It was a mistake. I didn't mean to happen that way." And then she kind of ends the conversation by saying she was supposed to be married in a few days, which she's been telling everybody. We find out that's about all she talks about, is the fact that she's supposed to be married in a few days. And then she looks back towards the window and says, "I can hear your heart," just like she could hear Feyre and Nezda's. And then she goes on to say, "When I sleep, I can hear your heart beating through the stone. Can you hear mine?" So this is where some theories come out in regards to her hearing his heart through the stone. So arguably, she is hearing it through the stone because they're on a mountain. The house is made into the mountain. It's completely made of stone. So it's pretty safe to say she is just hearing his heart through the stone walls or through the stone floor, just depending on where their rooms are. But there have been theories that because she says, "I can hear your heart through the stone," whose heart was encased in stone at the end of book 1? Tamlin, because that was part of the curse, that his heart became stone during Amarantha's curse. And that's why when Feyre stabbed him in the heart, it didn't kill him, because there was stone encasing his heart. So there is a fan theory that this is actually Tamlin shapeshifted to look like Lucien. And that's why Elaine can hear his heart beating through the stone.
That was not where I thought you were going to go with that one.
That one's
I
kind
thought
of
you were going to
wild.
be like, oh, because he was the emissary, he had a stone heart as well. Not, yeah, no, that one.
Tamlin? No,
Yeah, I don't know.
that one's a little bit too far out there.
So, well, okay, hear me out though, because at the end of book 2, when Elaine is initially changed and comes out of the cauldron, I brought it up then that Lucien looks between Tamlin and Elaine a couple of times before saying, "You're my mate." So he
Okay.
does that, making people think that Tamlin and Elaine are mates, not Lucien and Elaine, but that Lucien said it to save Tamlin. Because we know through everything that people said in book 2 and at the beginning of book 3 that so many people have changed the story of what happens because they don't want Tamlin to feel bad. Alice did it. Lucien says he did it. The sentries have done it. So who's to say Lucien isn't doing it at the end of book 2 as well? Because Tamlin isn't in a place to acknowledge that he might be mated to someone other than Feyre.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna have to think
I
of this one a little bit. Yeah, but how does that explain though okay, so you're saying that Tamlin would have shapeshifted to look like Lucien.
Yes.
So
my question is when?
Right.
well, they could have
That's
done
the
it
big question.
before though. What if they went in? What if Lucien's in on it?
That's what I mean.
So
What if
before they went into
Tamlin
Highburn,
is somewhere in the night court as well? No. So it wouldn't have been, so Tamlin wouldn't have shapeshifted into Lucien until book 3. That everything would have happened in Highburn the way it did. And then they came home. They went back to the spring court. Feyre went with them. And then when Feyre goes to leave, she talks about Jurian and Tamlin are off hunting. But Tamlin has left his bandolier of knives in his tent. Why would he leave them and not take them while he's hunting?
True, because he does always have his bandolier knives when he goes.
But the
Always.
one thing that kind of disputes that is when Feyre finds Lucien and Ianthe, he is bound in the blue stone chains, which means he cannot access his power. So if that was actually Tamlin shapeshifted into Lucien, then he shouldn't have looked like Lucien. He should have shapeshifted back to himself. So then the thought process is Lucien is the one who goes to the night court, who fights through the autumn court with Feyre, or through the winter court, ends up at the night court with Feyre. But this is all through Feyre's perspective. So what is Lucien doing through these first couple of days? Because we do get mention in the set of chapters that we're talking about now that Lucien goes off into the city, goes to different libraries to look into things. We're going to find out later that Lucien has actually had some sort of contact outside of the court because he's been in contact with the woman in State Court, the one who made the eye for him.
Yes.
He's been in contact with her because she comes to the High Lord meeting and talks about it. So we know Lucien has had contact outside of the night court through his time in the night court. So at some point, did Tamlin manage to get in, or did Lucien get out and they shapeshifted then to the point where when this scene is happening, this is actually Tamlin and not Lucien?
See, I don't
It's
know
a
if it was
stretch.
I could see where they could have done it if he was going for the libraries, but correct me if I'm wrong, the first couple days, Cass or Azriel were at the House of Wind the whole time, guarding. He didn't go anywhere the first few days. It was once they started to trust him more, a little bit after they moved him to the townhouse. So if that theory is that they swapped places, it would still be too early within this scene, wouldn't it?
I mean, Lucien is going into the family library and no one else is in the House of Wind other than Nesda and Elaine.
True.
So and Feyre even talks about it right after she pulls out of his mind while she's talking about it with Rhysand later on in this chapter. She talks about feeling bad for doing it, but that she did it because she was protecting her sister. And Rhysand even goes so far as to say, and he broke our rules, so you had every right to make sure what his intentions were. So that tells me that even if Cassian and or Azriel are there, they're not paying incredibly close attention to him. So, like I said, it is a little far-fetched, but it's out there.
But if the words were set up to where he can't winnow within the House of Wind, his only option would be going down the stairs. And when he and Feyre are going through everything, he's exerted and he's talking about, well, how am I keeping how are you not winded? How are you not exhausted? Because he wasn't conditioned well and trained well. So to even go down the stairs, which we
I'm
see
not going to
further on
say
in
he
Nesda's
wasn't
book,
conditioned or trained well. I'm going to say not as well as her.
conditioned as Feyre.
But you also have to think of it because Lucien is able to fight against two of his brothers before
True.
Azriel steps in. So yes, he may have been more winded than Feyre climbing the mountain to go into the winter court, because that's when it specifically calls that out, but he is still trained and trained well. So
That's
that's not
true.
to say he couldn't handle the 10,000 steps.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. That's true.
So
Hmm.
it's one of those things where we don't really have enough
It
information.
still feels so far-fetched, though. Like, I don't know. So is there a spot within the books where the theory goes to that they switch back?
There's no way to figure that out, because in the next set of chapters that we're going to do, Lucien leaves and then he is gone. But then he is gone and we have the High Lords meeting and Tamlin shows up as Tamlin. So if Lucien had still been there, then
And
maybe
Lucien
we'd be able.
volunteers
Exactly.
too.
He volunteered
Sorry.
to leave. So what if then that was Tamlin and he officially left and actually did send Lucien to go get the queen? Because Lucien does go to find the queen. And at that point, they switch back, and then Tamlin is able to go. But if that's the case, then like how? Because then you go into, okay, well, if Tamlin's not Tamlin, if he's Lucien, then where does the King of Highburn think Tamlin is?
It's a rabbit hole of rabbit holes. My
Right?
word.
Exactly.
I'm glad I don't have a headache today.
No, I've kind of got one after.
After trying to figure it out.
Well, yeah, because I'm just a little confused. So it's just, yeah, it's making my head hurt just a bit.
When you first said it, I was like, no, but far-fetched, I feel, but I could see the possibility.
Like, I don't actually think this is Tamlin shapeshifted into Lucien. I don't think that's the case. As much as I would love, I don't know if love is the right word. I like the idea of Elaine and Tamlin being mates because I feel like she fits into the spring court really well. And I feel like what we've seen of her demeanor and her character, that she would be a lot better for Tamlin than Feyre was, because Feyre needed more, and I feel like Elaine doesn't. Elaine would be happy in the gardens planning parties, which is exactly what Tamlin wants in a wife. So I kind of like the idea of her being mates to Tamlin. But based on Sarah's interview from March, she's not sure she wants to give Tamlin a full redemption arc, which would mean he ends up with someone. So that's kind of the other piece that makes me think, no, it's not Tamlin shapeshifted as Lucien. But is there something else, some other connection between Tamlin and Elaine that we just don't know about?
That'd be a crazy twist, though, wouldn't it?
Right? It would.
Like crazy.
We'll keep picking up pieces if we can of it to see. But it also makes me think that, like, if Feyre goes into his mind, and it seems to be the same mind that it was the first time she went into it, and he's having these thoughts, not does he know that she's in his head? And so, like, that's the other thing, that if it was Tamlin, wouldn't Feyre be able to tell when she goes into his head?
I was about to say that too. I feel like there would have to be some kind of a slip up, because they're not going to know unless they're planning that ahead of time. What if she
Right.
does,
Except how would human emotion is experienced so differently. So, or Fey emotion itself is experienced so differently being to being. So my thought goes to when we go to where he's saying she's the most beautiful person being I've ever seen, and then he gets that oily feeling because he said the same thing to Jasminda. That's where I kind of go, well, no, that's genuine,
Exactly.
personal,
Mhm.
gross feeling. I can't fake disgust in myself if I'm trying to pretend it's you looking at you in the mirror and I'm trying to fake that. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You can act it, and some people can act it extremely well. I can put on a smiley face and mask and be the overly peppy a lot of time, but that's me, doing public persona thing. I can't truly in my head change that inner voice and that inner feeling of myself.
Than any way for them to know that Feyre was listening in, and just randomly saying that to himself. You can't fake
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's a theory. It's out there. So Lucien does, after Elaine asks if he can hear her heart just like she can hear his, he says, "No, I cannot." And her response is, "No one ever does. No one ever looked, not really." He did. He saw me. He will not now. So presumably she's talking about the human that she was engaged to, that he is the first one who really saw her. These are like the little pieces that I'm picking up on from Elaine that I haven't really dug into in the last however many rereads I've done of the book. But I feel like she is a misunderstood character, just like Nesda is currently a misunderstood character until we get to her book. And Feyre, a little bit, at least in book 1, is kind of misunderstood until she comes into her own, even in book 2. So I think we just don't see her. We don't get that perspective yet. So we can't gauge. But I think it'll be interesting to get her perspective on more things because I'd like to know. I'd like to see for her. Because, yeah, she does mention no one ever sees her until. And then Feyre pulls herself back, and Nesda knows immediately what it is that she did. And is like, well, have you ever done that to me? And Feyre's like, no, I most definitely have not. But one thing Lucien does say as he's leaving, he sees Nesda and Feyre. He tells her, you need to get her out of the house, take her to the sea, to the garden, as long as you get her out of the house for an hour or two, which I think is really interesting because that's all Feyre wanted at the beginning of book 2 was to just get out of the house for an hour or two, and he couldn't do it. Now he's recommending that because it's his mate that's in question. Whatever. Lucien, whatever. So at that point, Feyre decides that they need to bring her sisters to the townhouse. That means Lucien is also going to move to the townhouse with them. So not everybody is big happy family in the townhouse. But I love that we now get to see Azriel and Elaine kind of start a friendship because they have a type of friendship that's very understanding and respectful of the other person, which I love because it's Azriel who kind of starts to pay attention to her more, and he's the one who puts pieces together on what she is or what her power is in the next couple of chapters. So they do move them into the townhouse, and I love this part because Rhysand is tasked with flying Nesda from the House of Wind to the townhouse. And Cassian and Feyre are both just like, what did you do to her after Nesda comes running in, needing a bathroom immediately so that she can go throw all of her guts out? Nesda was stomping through the front door, her face a remarkable shade of grief. And Rhys says, she complained that I was flying deliberately slow, so I went fast. That's it. That's his explanation,
And that's such a brother-in-law thing to do, too.
right?
Like, just same as a big brother. Just, oh, I gotta pick on you. You complained about one thing, let me do the other.
Yes. And I think it's also Rhysand still hasn't forgiven Nesda for everything that she didn't do when Feyre went off hunting in the woods when they were younger. So I think there's a little bit of he's getting his retribution at this point. A little
Yeah.
revenge.
I think making her think twice before running her mouth a little
Right?
bit. Okay, well, if you want fast, here you go.
Yep. And I love Cassian's response because Cassian's response is, well, now she's never going to fly again. He's like, you have ruined it for her. Thank you, Rhysand, because she's never going to fly with me now. And I love how they describe Nesda's eyes after she comes out of the bathroom and she's super frustrated, super mad. Her eyes burned, quicksilver set aflame is how they describe that. And Nesda walking straight to Rhysand to give him a piece of her mind for what he did. And Cassian gets in between them because he knows he needs to de-escalate the situation real fast, like real fast. Her power is about to explode and it's going to be bad. So Cassian just steps right in front of her. And it's just like, hey, the last time I brawled in this house, I got kicked out. Maybe you shouldn't do that. And I love that Feyre says Nesda's burning gaze slid to him, still outraged, but hinted with incredulity that he would actually step in front of her while her power is kind of roiling inside of her. And Lucien then says, what are you? To Nesda, the question that no one wants to ask. And Nesda says, I made it give something. She means the cauldron. And Feyre has the hairs along her arms raise up because she realizes that the cauldron is what Nesda took a piece from, which we're going to learn a little bit more in the next couple of chapters. Nesda goes up to her room. Rhys asks Lucien if the flame in her eyes is similar to what Lucien has from the Autumn Court. And Lucien's response is, no, it's not from my own arsenal. He says, that was ice so cold it burned, ice and yet fluid like flame, or flame made of ice. And Feyre's response, after being with the bone carver shortly before, her now response is, I think it's death. I think the power is death made flesh, or whatever power the cauldron holds over such things. That's why the carver heard about her. And Rhys's response is, well, only Nesda would not just conquer death, but pillage it. And this is when Feyre finally kind of thinks it had only been seconds that she was under in the cauldron, but she wonders and she thinks I had never thought to ask how long it was for them when they were in the cauldron, which we talked about in previous episodes that yes, it was seconds on the outside, but it could have been much longer for Nesda and Elain on the inside. I'm going to mention this part because I feel it's such an instructor comment. Feyre and Rhysand are now in their room, kind of talking back and forth, getting ready to go to the Hewn City. But Feyre is also thinking about earlier, she had talked to Cassian, who is now up on the roof, sharpening his blades. He has 9 swords, 9 knives that he has put on himself. And Feyre's response is like, really? Do you think 9 swords are really necessary? And his response is, if you have enough time to question me, then you should have enough time to do another workout. Like, I feel like that's something your boss says when you're at work. If you have time to lean, you have time to clean. Like, that's what your parents, if you don't have anything else to do, I have a long list of tasks that I can give you. It's such an instructor or a mentor type of thing to say, and it makes me laugh. But then we get a conversation between Feyre and Rhys. And Feyre is asking Rhysand, what determines mates? Who is it? How is it determined? What decides what is a good match? And Rhysand's response is initially to just kind of tease her a little bit, joke around, just not give her a straight answer. And he's like, fate, the mother, the cauldron, swirling eddies, who knows? And Feyre's like, Rhys, really though, what's the answer? Because then she goes on to say, you said your parents weren't right for each other. Tamlin said his own parents were wrong for each other. So who is to say that what Elain needs is Lucien? Because Feyre is now looking out the window. Elain and Asriel are in the back garden and just kind of quietly chilling together. They are hanging out separately but together. And Feyre is just questioning, what if that's what Elain needs and not Lucien? Like, who decides that? And they have a discussion on mates in general, whether a female or a male can dispute a mate bond or not. Rhysand says in his court, forcing a mate bond is illegal. It's been illegal, but that's not the case in other courts. In some courts, even in some territories on the continent, the male actually feels he owns the female in a mate bond. So Rhys essentially says Elain is allowed to dispute it or refuse it, but there will always be a bond there because it is a living bond, a bridge between the two of them. So even if she says no and ends up married to somebody else or loves somebody else, there will always still be a pull to Lucien. And that Elain will have the protection of the Night Court. Lucien will not be allowed to take her or to harm any male that she chooses to love instead. And that's because Rhysand is saying he will not allow it. The Night Court will not allow it. That's not to say that other courts wouldn't allow Lucien to take Elain. And Rhys does say that there is some guesswork as far as who is chosen to be mate, that it's more or less based on who's going to provide a strong offspring. But he goes so far as to say mates are rare. So the fact that Elain has a mate, Feyre has a mate, and we're starting to question, or if Nesda also has a mate, that is all rare, even if it doesn't feel that way because this is all that Feyre knows. She knows her bond with Rhysand. Very short amount of time has passed since she came to be with Rhysand, and now Elaine has a mate. So it may not seem like it, but mates are actually really rare. And then they start talking about Azriel and Mor. Why aren't they mates? Azriel's probably been wondering for the last 500 years why a mate bond between the two of them hasn't snapped into place. And Rhysand kind of said, is it okay for me to ask you to please not play matchmaker with our inner circle? And she's like, I would never. Haha. Really, really, Feyre? Everybody in this court would. And
I was going to say, through all of this, I love that because we know they're planning for the war, they're getting prepped mentally, all of that. I love that there's such a normal couple interaction. She's getting ready. You get the tidbits of her lacing up her shoes, braiding her hair, him starting to hand her the hairpins, just
yeah,
having a general husband, wife, fiance, mate conversation side by side, just hanging out, just a hey, I love our life together type moment. Like it's just a lazy Sunday type, let's prep.
right.
I love that Sarah wrote that in the midst of the angst, that she still adds these soft moments. Same with the couple tiny slivers we got at Aelin and Rowan. You know, just those brief glimpses. But this one just felt so, all right, what is my sister doing now? How can we help them? Like,
Right.
don't mess up our friend group. Come on.
Yes, it's such a normal interaction between the two of them. Like not High Lady and High Lord, just as partners to be chatting about their family and friends while getting ready. Yep, I agree. And this is when they do talk about Feyre going into Lucian's mind, that she's upset with it and wonders if she should tell him. And Rhysand's response is, you have to decide for yourself whether assuaging your guilt is worth telling him that you've broken his trust. Because that's all it comes down to, is she's feeling guilty. So if she tells Lucien, then she won't feel as guilty, but it might break the tentative trust that they have between each other. And he goes so far as to say, then say this is the last time and be done with it. Don't feel guilty about it. And even goes so far as to say he broke the rules first. You had every right to make sure he wasn't going to harm or take Elaine away. So it was justified. If you need to tell yourself that to move past it, then do that. And then, of course, he puts the crown on top of her head, which is the female version of the crown atop his head. And then he turns to her and says, okay, ready to be with. And this is where she says, yes. And this time I'm the one who gets to make Keir back. So they go to the Hewn City, the Court of Nightmare. Feyre, she's covered up a little bit more than she was the last time, but she is still in what they love to call cobwebs and stardust. Mor is in her usual red. Amryn is in her usual pant set, but Nesta is in something different because Amryn has chosen to dress her a little bit different. Complete black, brutal, severe gown from neck to toe that Nesta is wearing. They all walk in. There is only one throne on the dais, which Rhys kind of planned for that. And I love that Feyre says, as all of them are walking in, there's no fear, no joy, no light in their faces because they have all put their masks on. This is who they have to be when they're here. They do torment the court just a little bit, not a whole lot. Rhysand actually takes Feyre and sits her down on the throne, and everybody around the crowd is murmuring in shock because they are officially confirming that she is the High Lady and that she will be seated above them and they will need to bow to her, not just to Rhysand. And there are a couple of Fae in the crowd who do kind of test Feyre's powers. They kind of creep up to the dais and then a little bit further, and that's when she pounces with her own magic, kind of like digging claws in as a cat would with a mouse. Of say, hey, I am just as powerful, if not more powerful than you, and I do have claws. They go to a war council room instead. So at this point, they're going off to talk to Kerr, try and talk him into his Darkbringer, get them to join in their cause. Kerr is kind of an idiot because he starts to mention that the payment is time with Feyre. And Rhysand is about 2 seconds away from just missing him, wiping him off the face of the earth. Comes down to Kier already knows what his asking price is going to be because he knew Lucien was going to ask. It's kind of a difficult conversation because Moore is there. Moore obviously hates her father, doesn't want to give in to anything that he wants whatsoever. At that point, a phantom wind opens the doors to the chamber and Eris walks in. The essentially crown prince, the High Lord's eldest son of Autumn Court, Lucien's eldest brother. Moore has zero idea. Well, everyone except Azriel and Rhysand had zero idea this was happening. Moore, Care, and Farah all had no idea that Eris was coming. And Moore is immediately hurt, feels betrayed by it, which we'll talk about in because this is all surprise. But Rhys has kind of brought Eris in to try and sweeten the bargain for Kier because he knows Kier is going to demand things that Rhys may not want to offer or may not want to offer completely. And so Eris is there to try and take a little bit off of that. We do find out that Azriel, while he was looking in the Autumn Court to try and find out how much Eris and his brothers knew in regards to Feyre and his power, he was caught by Eris. And in doing so, they kind of make a bargain with Eris as well. So we find all of this out in some pretty annoying conversation between everybody at the table. Moore is incredibly upset that nobody told her. And it comes down, he wants access to Valaris. He wants access to the city. Now that everybody knows Valaris is there, he feels that they find Hybern to have some pretty interesting points that they feel contained in their section, not able to leave. So Kerr is trying to hint that if they don't let them out of the mountain, the hewn city, that they're going to side with Hybern instead. And it is all because he wants access to Valaris because he knows how much Valaris means to Moore. And at this point, all he cares about is taking Moore away from. Of course, Rhysand has anticipated this. He's met with multiple people in the city of Valaris. He's met with all of the governors of the palaces, all of the markets to tell them, hey, when they come, don't serve them, don't sell to them, don't give them rooms in the inns, the hotels, that kind of thing. He's already started to take precaution. Feyre does mention that it feels like a crack was running through the inner circle because of what they were having to do, because Azriel also didn't tell Moore that he was caught, so she is blindsided on both fronts. Kerr finally agreed. The entire bargain ends up coming down to Eris will make a bargain with Kier. So it kind of sweetens the deal a little bit. Kier and his Darkbringers will fight with the Night Court in exchange for access to Valaris. On the other side of that is now Eris has said, I want your support, the Night Court support, when he kills his father and makes a bid for the throne of the Autumn Court. In exchange, Eris won't tell anyone about Feyre's power, and he will also make sure that the Autumn Court supports the Night Court in the war. So they multifaceted too. Feyre goes one step further and says that she is in need of the Ouroboros mirror, which is the mirror that the Bone Carver wants. Kerr's response is, you can have it, consider it a mating present, but in order to have it, you have to take it yourself. And Feyre asks, what does that mean? And he says to take the Ouroboros, to claim it, you must first look into it. And everyone who has attempted to do so has either gone mad or been broken beyond repair. Even a High Lord or two, if legends are true. So it's yours if you dare to face it. And then he gets up to leave. Again, the doors open on a phantom wind. He kind of excuses himself, doesn't wait for permission to leave, but his final words are, Lord Thanatos, a name we have not heard before. Lord Thanatos is having difficulties with his daughter again. He requires my assistance. And that's it. We don't know who Thanatos is. We don't know who his daughter is. What is in regards to this? But we heard a lord in the Night Court of the Hewn City, a name that we haven't gotten before. And we might talk about it again in a couple of books. So it is just Eris. This is when we find out that Eris has agreed to not tell his father or anyone about Feyre's power if the Night Court back. And I think I'm going to point out some interesting things throughout this encounter between Eris and Moore, Azriel, Feyre, and Rhys. Because Eris's first words to Moore are, you look well. So he's actually complimenting her. One of the only other things that he says to her is in a couple paragraphs later is to tell her that she looks beautiful, which just like based on what we've heard, what people think of Eris, how he acts in this scene just makes me question all of it. Because we've talked about it a little bit before, we've hinted at it before that Eris may not be as bad as we think he is. Very similar to how people saw Rhys, but he's not as bad as everyone thinks. We do find out that Rhys did go to Eris's brothers and had them forget Feyre's powers, and Eris assumed that he was going to do the same thing to him. That's why he kind of went out looking for Azriel, because he knew Azriel was coming, kind of caught Azriel and required them to create a bargain between them. If protect Eris, he's doing it to protect himself, but also because he knows what's coming. Eris also knows that stuff with Hybern is worse than what everyone is saying it is, and that he wants to be on the right side of the war, which means on the side with the Night Court and not Hybern. Moore makes a comment to Eris. It was the asking price for him to side with them and to protect Feyre, another little bride for you to torture. And Eris's response is, I don't know who fed you those lies to begin with, likely those who you surround yourself. And Moore says, well, you never gave any evidence to the contrary, certainly not when you left me in those woods. And this is where we start to see a little bit from Eris. He says, there were forces at work that you have never considered. I'm not going to waste my breath explaining them to you. Believe what you want about me, which is very similar to things that Rhys has said to others. You can believe what you want. That's not the case, but I'm not going to try and change your mind. And then Feyre kind of steps in and says, you hunted me down, so why shouldn't we believe the worst? And he says, I was given an order and sent to do it with two of my... And then he hesitates before saying brothers, leading us to believe, yes, they're blood related, most likely, but he doesn't actually see them as brothers in the same way that Azriel, Rhys, and Cassian see each other as brothers. And then Feyre asks, and what of the brother you hunted down alongside me, the one whose lover you helped to execute? And this is where we find out that Eris was actually not there when they executed Lucien's lover, that he refused to go and refused to be a part of it. And that was the first time he had actually ever defied his father. And that because of it, he was punished for it. And by the time he got free, the only thing he was able to do was to make sure that Tamlin got word that Lucien was going to be taken out into the Autumn Court woods and killed by his brothers, because that was also the plan, to kill his lover as well as kill Lucien. Eris was able to get word to Tamlin so that Tamlin was there, and that's how those two brothers ended up dying, was because Lucien and Tamlin killed them. So we find out that Eris actually helped save Lucien, and Lucien probably doesn't even know. And he ends it with, not all of us were so lucky in our friends and family as you, Rhys. Eris does offer to go ahead and just kill his father now and ascend to the throne and not have to worry about getting Baron to join the war. And Rhys says, that's tempting, but that's too messy to do now. We need to just continue as is. We need to have an alliance now because we're going to need to fight Hybern very. Eris does make a comment to Moore that he's surprised that she still can't hold her emotions in check when she's around her father. And this is where he says, you had every emotion written right on that pretty face of yours. So that's how Keir knew to ask for Valaris, because of how much Moore was pushing against giving him access. And Eris ends it by saying, I wouldn't have touched you, but when you slept with the other person, when you slept with Cassian, I knew why and I understood why you did it. So gave you your freedom and ended the betrothal in no uncertain term. So he's essentially saying, I knew you didn't want to be a part of it, so I ended it because you weren't able to. And Azriel's response is, yeah, and then what happened next? You left her in the woods for a day for someone to find. And he says, there are a few things I regret, and that is one of them. And perhaps one day, now that we're allies, I shall tell you why and what it cost. That is why I want one of the books to be at least more information on Eris or his story, because I feel like he is maybe not quite on Rhysand's level, but he could be very similar to Rhysand. And I want to know more because I want to love him like we love Rhysand.
Yeah, I think he's one of the good guys.
I agree, but I feel like he's just been always put in a really bad place and not had the support that he needs to be able to implement good changes instead of bad. So then they get back to the townhouse and Moore is essentially crumbling because of everything that's happened. Cassian, since he had to stay back at the townhouse to protect Valaris as well as protect, he is now being told what happened. She is understanding everything now that all the pieces are being laid out in front of her, but she's still upset about it because no one told her. Amren even goes to a point as that you did what you knew to be right, but you made a mistake in not telling everyone beforehand. And I hate this one ends because Moore is so upset that she brings Amarantha up and says if Amarantha walked through that door. She's comparing Eris and her father to Amarantha, which I don't think is fair because Eris never actually hurt Moore. Yes, he left her there to die, presumably, but he never actually hurt her. It's her family that hurts her. But I don't know. To me, I feel like it's different because they hurt her once. They beat her up once. So yes, maybe they've put her down over the years she's growing up. But like Rhysand was traumatized for 50 years by Amarantha to keep his family safe. I don't feel like it's the same. But Moore brings her and says if she were alive and I offered to work with her to save us, how would you feel? And Rhysand responds with, if she walked in that door and offered us a slim shot at survival, I would take it and not give a crap about all the stuff that she made me do to her for 50 years. I would thank the Cauldron for sending. And Rhys is so upset at this point. One, because he realizes he's done something to hurt Moore, to kind of cleave her inner circle a little bit in that relationship. But also, she brought up Amarantha, so he's frustrated with that, frustrated with the whole scenario. So the whole thing is just a bad situation. And Feyre mentions trying to get to him through the bond, that it was a howling void, a raging dark tempest. And it's actually Amren who steps in between Rhys and Moore before things can get pushed too far. And that's when she tells Rhysand, you should have told everybody before it happened. And then Feyre steps in and says, this is war. Our allies are few. Many of them don't trust us. I've never been to war and back, but you have. But I imagine that we will not last long if we cleave apart from within. So at that point, everyone kind of takes a step back. They change their conversation to the Ouroboros. Moore says that it's true what her father said about it, that it would be difficult for Feyre to claim. And so they're not sure if they're going to move forward with that. But they also have now brought up that they went to the prison without telling Amren. So this is a whole other thing that wasn't told to everyone in the inner circle. So Amren is now frustrated because she's just finding out that they plan to try and unleash or bind the carver. She bound herself, and she's not thrilled about it, arguably so, because she doesn't want to go back to the prison or want to remind anyone that she was there to begin with. But I love this initial interaction before, like, we have Rhys and Moore are facing off, and Amren steps in. Now we have Amren and Rhys facing off. And I think it's interesting. No one actually steps in, but they place each other very strategically. So Cassian actually moves to Nesda, and Nesda actually agrees. Like there's no conversation out loud with them, but he moves to her side and kind of like moves her behind him. And she goes sink without putting up a fight whatsoever. And then Azriel is in a corner, just shadows, to the point where Feyre didn't even see him move. And Rhys is asking Amren how she did it so that they can know how to do it for the. But instead of actually brawling, Amren says, okay, call off your watchdog. Everything's going to be fine. And Cassian, even after Amren says it's okay, still pushes Nesda behind him. So then Nesda gets up on her tiptoes to look over his shoulder, which cracks me up that she's still wanting to know what's going on. And Amren says she can't say it because the stone beneath the house has ears, the wind has ears, and all of it is listening and will take it back to the prison. And she doesn't want it to get back to the prison and have other inmates bind themselves like she did and end up out of the prison. So they do put a shield around them so that they're able to speak without the wind and the stone hearing. And she tells them that she had to give something up, had to give herself up to be able to walk out of there. She had to become something else entirely, something the prison would not recognize as an inmate. So she bound herself into the Fey body that she is. And well, you told me somebody else bound you. And she says, well, I lied. I bound myself to cover up what I'd done so that no one would know. To be able to escape the prison, or had to become mortal. Not in the human sense, but in the sense that Rhysand is mortal compared to the bone carver, kind of. And she does kind of talk about who she was before. That she was loyal. She felt things like loyalty and wrath, curiosity, but not the full spectrum. She talks about how she was part of an army with her brothers and sisters. They had laid waste to twin cities, smote them wholly into rubble on the plain, and then a rip through the world happens, and all of her brothers and sisters fly away. They fled, but she still feels that curiosity because she's a little bit different from how they were. So she goes to check out the rip, and she was kind of sucked through it, through the tear in the sky. And so to become Fae, to become what she is now and leave the prison, she had yielded my grace, my perfect immortality. And I knew once I did, I would feel pain and regret and want, and I would burn with it. I would fall, which I think is really, really interesting terms to use in this description of what she had to give. And she didn't care at that point because she had been locked away in the prison for so long. She didn't care what she had to give up because she wanted to feel the wind on her face, feel the sun. She didn't remember what sunlight felt like. And so she bound herself on the body, shoved my burning grace deep into me, and gave up everything I was, or cell door just on. So, like I said, I think it's really interesting the way she words it, that she had to yield her grace and no longer just follow orders, but to actually be able to feel and determine and make decisions for herself. And that it would mean a fall, to like a fall from grace, which is very similar to biblical stories and other angels falling from grace. So they do talk about, can she be unbound from what she currently is? And she says, not by me. And they ask what would happen if she was. And she says, I would not remember you. I would not care for any of you. I would either smite you or abandon you. What I feel would be foreign to me. I would not feel it anymore. It would not hold sway over. And Nesda asks, what were you? She's the only one who actually has the guts to say. And Amren's response is a messenger and soldier assassin for a wrathful god who ruled a young world. Which makes me wonder, who's the wrathful god? What young world did she come from? I just want to. And then they're all interrupted because Elaine comes downstairs. They have a bubble over themselves, so Elaine couldn't hear them. She didn't know they were there. So she comes down the stairs, and then all of a sudden they're there. And she, oh, I was sleeping, but I heard. And then she trails off and says, well, I didn't hear you. And then Asriel, who we talked about, is starting to see her a little bit more, steps up and says, you heard something else. And she says, I think I was dreaming. But I think I'm dreaming all the time these days. So it makes you wonder the vision she's seen. Does it feel like she's daydreaming or dreaming while she's. And she says, I can hear her crying. Everyone thinks she's dead, but she's not, only different, changed as I was. So we're going to find out later on. This is also the firebird that she's talking about. We'll talk about it in the next episode, who that firebird actually is. But Elaine goes on to say, I saw young hands wither with age. I saw a box of black stone I saw a feather of fire land on snow and melt. It was angry, so angry that something was taken, so it took something from them as punishment. So all kind of continuation of the ramblings that we heard from her last chapter, that no one's quite sure where it's coming from or how to the ramblings to. Azriel essentially takes Elaine away, continues talking to her because he's the only one who's really seen. And then Nezda and Farah have a chance to talk. And Nesta essentially tells her, she took me to a room full of treasure. Some of them wanted to hurt us. Some of them were alive or aware, like in the stories and lies they fed us over the wall. That it was a training exercise with a form of magic to repel intruders. And so kind of like the wall is going to be, she wanted me to breach the defenses, find weakness in them, not repair anything, but just find the defenses. And Pharaoh was like, oh, okay, great. So at least something went right tonight. And Nessa's like, no, I failed every single. So no, it did not go right. Nothing went. And then Farah says we need to do something about Elaine, and Nessa's like, well, what solution could you possibly think of or have, because she doesn't have any. Yeah, so they're going to have a healer come the next day and kind of check out Elaine to see if they can figure out what's going on in her. But Nesta does say everything has a cost. Maybe the cost of her youth and immortality was losing part of her sanity. And then Feyre's response is, well, what was your cost? And Nezda isn't sure, but she says maybe it's watching Elaine suffer while I get away unscathed. Feyre and Rhysand then end up back in their bedroom having a conversation at the end of their day, kind of regroup. And Rhys is really struggling, obviously, because of everything that happened with the Hewn City and with Mole. Feyre asks if he's all right, and he says no. She can tell that he's not in a brooding mood and needs to be pulled out of it like she's done in the past. Like, he's in the type of mood that he just needs solace from her, and that's exactly what she gives him. He said, if Amarantha showed up to this house, I would kill her on the spot without even letting her. And he said, that's why I would rather take all this upon myself than see more crime. See any kind of break happen for any of my friends or for our inner circle, I would rather pull it all on myself. And she understands, but she needs him to be there for her. And I love the way it ends because she holds him. And then she goes a step further and actually opens her mind to him fully so that his mind could curl around mine. So it's like not even just physically they're wrapped around each other, but their minds too, to get that soul. Farah does go the next day to have more training lessons with Cass. Or no, she goes to meet with Cassian on top of the House of Wind, decides that she's going to winnow and then attempt to glide onto the balcony, and Cassian is trying to tell her to backflip, but she doesn't have the space to do it, and so she slams in a wall. And he said, really, you should only do that if you have enough space to land or bank and circle so until you slow down. And she's like, okay, I got it. Let's move on. And he's like, do you want to go hard today or do you want to go easy after everything that happened the night before? And she's like, I want to go hard. I want to limp out of here. And that's exactly what happens. She limps. And then she talks about her lessons with Azriel afterwards, are him telling her about the breeze and her trying to memorize his instructions on the currents, downdrafts, and how the different temperatures affect the wind. So flying isn't just about having wings, it's also understanding the air and the wind around. So she has a short lesson with him and then comes back to the townhouse where Moore is poring over letters that have come back from the High Lords, the first set of High Lords, in regards to the meeting. Helion, who is the High Lord of Day, we're going to find out he's a character. Like, how do I word Helion? Because I truly love Helion. I really, but he is definitely like the one who has a lot of fun. He likes to party and he's going to have orgies with everybody is what it comes to. That is Helion. So Moore goes so far as to say, if you read between all of the innuendo in his letter, then yes, he is on board. He will help us with this war. She says, Thiessen, who is the High Lord of Dawn, He will come, but only if it's in a truly neutral and safe location. Callias, the High Lord of Winter, isn't sure that he can trust them after everything that happened under the mountain, but he will most likely come. So those are the 3 courts that they assume they were going to have at least a partial alliance. So it's the other. They haven't heard anything back. Moore and Farah get a chance to talk. She does mention that she understands the position that Rhys was in, that they had a chance to talk, and Rhys explained everything. Moore doesn't like it, doesn't like having to have a bargain and work closely with Eris. She would have done the same thing if it meant protecting. And she goes so far as to say, if I let all of this affect me, if I let it ruin my relationships with my friends and those I care about, then my father wins and Eris wins and all the males like them win. So she's determined to put her best foot forward to overcome. The next morning, the healer comes to check out Elaine and finds that there is nothing wrong with her. She needs to eat and she needs to get out of the house and get some fresh air and enjoy the sunlight. But outside of that, there is nothing wrong. She does go so far as to say that she has a shield of some sort around her mind, that Maja is the name of the healer, is not able to enter Elaine's mind to ascertain if her mind is okay. She says that she is cauldron made. You are not like the rest of us. I can pierce the places it left its mark most deep. And she tells Feyre that she does not recommend Feyre or Rhysand trying to enter Elaine or Nez's minds. She says that there isn't technically anything wrong with Elaine, and she doesn't even like that word wrong. She says she is different. Perhaps she is changed. And then she points to Lucien and says the mating bond is a bridge between souls. Have him sit with her, talk, sense, see what he can kind of gauge from Elaine, but don't. And I like this little interaction that we get right after Maja leaves, because Nezda is super frustrated that the healer wasn't able to find anything. And so Feyre is asking Lucien if he would at least try with Elaine to see if he can sense anything. And Nezda goes to cut her off, and Feyre snaps at her. And Nezda actually listens because Feyre's using her high lady voice, is what I'm going to call it. She went into high lady mode and she is getting stuff done. And Nessa's, okay, crap. I guess I can't push her on this. And Nessa's like, so what? You're just going to drag her down here? And Feyre's like, no, I'm going to invite her for tea. Feyre and Moore are going to be sitting in the dining room, monitoring Lucien and Elaine having. And Nessa's going to be in the sitting room, also monitoring Lucien and Elaine. And Lucien kind of mumbles something along the lines of not needing to be monitored. And they all 3 women turn to him with raised eyebrows, like, really? You really want to push this? And he's like, lifts his hands up, claims, I'm going to go Frenchen up, and then walks down the hall. Because he's like, nope, I am not going to get in between 3 feet. Feyre mentions it was the most uncomfortable 30 minutes I could. And she wonders as she's sitting there, Lucien and Elaine are just kind of sitting in the other room having tea, not necessarily talking, but just in the same room together. And Feyre wants, is the mating bond, does it feel different for Elaine and Lucien? Because she didn't really know the mating bond was there because she thought it was the bargain. So she doesn't know, like, it's hard for her to distinguish between what was the mating bond back then versus what was the bargain. She only knows essentially what the mating bond is now and wonders how different it is because Elaine and Lucien haven't accepted. So as Moore and Nezda and Feyre all kind of monitoring this, Rhys and Cassian walk up, and Feyre talks to them mind to mind and says, don't come in, don't interrupt us. And she explains that both Cassian and Rhys are like, oh, okay, we definitely do not want to get in the middle of. And he specifically says, with Nezda watching everything like a hawk and you two circling like vultures, I know who's going to win that fight if they have to fight with Rhysand and Cassian go off to have a drink instead of coming. Feyre's like, well, we're just chaperoning to be. And she's like, I could have used a chaperone when I was around you. And he's like, what are you talking about? You have 4 of them in the house. And I think this part is really funny because while Rhysand and Feyre are having this mind-to-mind conversation, Cassian is sunning his wings. And there are children that have come around him to kind of see his wings because they don't see Illyrians. They've probably never seen an Illyrian other than Cassian and Azriel. Feyre can hear Amren hiss in the other room for Nesda to focus. So most likely, Nesda's attention is on Cassian sunning his wings and not on the task that she's supposed to be doing with Amren. So I think it's funny that we see Nesda pull focus. And then Lucien goes to pull on the bond, and Elaine stands up because she can feel that. She can feel the bond. She describes it as if a thread had pulled on her. Nesda gets up to defend Elaine from Lucien, even though nothing really happened. And then it's at this point when Elaine says twin ravens are coming, one white and one, and that's it. And then Lucien then, of course, is being interrogated by the three women as to what just happened. And he's like, well, there's a bond. It's a real thread. But he can't really sense anything outside of, he was just starting to get to her side of the bond when everything happened, when she got up and walked away, and then Nesda barred him. But I think it's interesting. I pointed this out that Lucien is telling them this, and Feyre is watching him and describing him and says his skin was darker because she's just recently seen Eris. So she's comparing Eris and Lucien. She says his skin was darker, a deep golden brown compared to the paleness of Eris's coloring. So she's already starting to notice that Lucien and Eris have some definite differences in their appearance. It could just be because some siblings look completely different, or it could be something else. We'll talk about it more. Then we switch gears to another training session with Azriel, and this just makes me laugh through the whole thing because like we talked about in last episode, now that we get some one-on-one with Feyre and Azriel, we see Azriel's personality coming out a little bit more because he's not around the people with big personalities like Cassian, and Azriel looks at it and he's like, well, judging by its size, I'd say it's been there for about 200 years at least. And later on, she asks, well, what did I do wrong? And he says, well, aside from the, and she says the Shadow Singer had a sense of humor, dry and quiet, but alone together, it came out far more often than it did amongst our. Okay. So Feyre then mentions that she's been doing one of like two things for the last couple of days. Either she's reading to try and find information on the wall. She's reading about the Ouroboros to discover how she can claim it. She is talking with Rhysand and the others about the war, debating where to meet with the High Lord, everything along those lines, trying to figure out who else they can try and find to join them in their war against. She does mention, as she's looking for information on the Ouroboros, the only thing she can find is information on the Dark Queen who once possessed her, which we know is the Weaver, because the carver told us that that was one of her mirrors. That there's no account of anyone who has mastered it, but just that a Dark Queen had once possessed it and cherished it, spied on the world with it, and used it to hunt down beautiful young maidens to keep her eternally. And that then we kind of flash back to Feyre training with Azriel, him telling her you don't steer with your arms, that you essentially don't even need your arms, while it all comes from your wings and your back muscles. Your arms are there for maybe balancing, but they're really not necessary. It's more for mental. And he says, you're immortal. You're very hard to break. At least that's what I told myself when I was trying to learn to fly at a later age. And she says, yes, hard to break, but it still hurts. And his response is, tell that to the tree, because I'm sure it hurt the tree when you ran in. And then she wants him to push her off the rock because it's that initial leap of faith that she's struggling with most. And so because of that, he then tells her a story. She attempts to fly once more before the story and really banks right into a tree. And he says, well, you banked well, but into another tree. And being aware of your surroundings is half of flying. And she's like, you've told me that already. You've told me that like a dozen times. And she asks, well, doesn't ask. She states that there really probably isn't a chance that she'll be able to fly with a legion in the war. And he says, probably not, but you never know what measure of training will be used. And that's when he goes in to tell her about this story, that he was struggling with flying, his fear of flying because he was so old. And after the war, Reese brought a story back to him to kind of give him that courage. And so the story is after the war, or towards the end of the war, Miriam and Drake, who we've talked about them multiple times. He is full-blooded Fae. She was half Fae. She was a hybrid, half Fae, half human. They go back to Miriam's home to free her people from the Fae. We don't ever get a name of the Fae Queen. She's just described as the evil Fae. Because they want to take their people to a new home where humans and Fae and hybrids can live together peacefully. So they go to the Black Land, is the place that it's called, which I also feel like is a biblical taking his people out of Egypt story because they're so very. So they go and get her people and bring them away from the evil Fae Queen. But the evil Fae Queen does not want to give them up, so she is chasing after them, and they make it to a large body, a large river, kind of like a small body of water. A strait is the way they described it. And there are supposed to be boats there to ferry them across to the other side so that they're actually able to escape. But the queen herself has come and actually destroyed all of their ships. So Draken's people are called the Seraphim. And guess what? Seraphim in the Bible. They are the angels with feathered wings instead of like the bat-like wings that the adder has or the Illyrians have. So the Seraphim have feathered and they have wind magic so that as they're flying, they're able to kind of manipulate the wind to fly better. So what they do, they realize that the legion of Draken's Seraphim are not large enough to actually overcome or fight against the army that's chasing them. So they decide then to part the use their wind magic to kind of pull two sides of the river apart so that they can actually walk on the ground of the riverbed to get to the other. Miriam is not willing to let any of her people get left behind. So she chooses to be the last person to come through. And so because of that, no one realizes that by the time they make it halfway across, that the soldiers coming behind them have made it to them, and now there is some fighting happening. No one realizes that Miriam has actually been stabbed and is bleeding out on the riverbed. There's quite a few people who have made it to the other side, Draken being one of them with some of his art. They couldn't hold it for much longer. They know that if they hold it for too long, then the army will come to their side, and then this will have all been in. So he is starting to let the river kind of come back on the far side so that his people, Americans' people, can still keep walking through, and then the water will hopefully wash away their enemy. But again, no one knows that Miriam has been stabbed and she is not able to walk. So a young cartographer named Nephel, who has become very close friends to Miriam. Nephel is the lover of one of Draken's generals. And Nephel wanted to be a part of the army, but her wings were smaller and one of them was deformed. So although she could fly, she couldn't even hold the weight of a shield. And because of that, she wasn't able to be a part of their legion. Instead, I love this part because she says instead, she made herself completely invaluable by becoming a cartographer. Since she couldn't join the army and fight, she then helps lead the army with Draken and helps them figure out the best places to actually. But I think it's funny that his people are called the Seraphim, which are angels. The spelling is really, really close to the Nephilim, which is a human and angel hybrid. So the words that Sarah uses for this whole group of people and this whole story it's like I said, very biblical in my mind. That's what because of all of the because of Nephel couldn't fly with the army, she couldn't hold a shield. But she knows Miriam is at the end, and so she is at the back. She goes back to get Miriam, finds her stabbed, and somehow, like miraculously, miracles happen, is able to actually carry Miriam and fly through the walls of water to the other side where Draken and the rest of her people are. And the reason it is such an unlikely thing to happen is one, because she couldn't even hold the weight of a shield. Miriam is about 3 times the weight of that shield, and she's managed to carry him. Two, they mentioned that the seraphim tried flying through the walls of water and it wasn't wide enough. They couldn't make it wide enough to actually fly through. That's why they had to walk or run through. But because Nephel's wings are smaller, she is able to fly, but it's like barely. Like there are inches on either sides of her wings between her wings and the wall. But she is still able to fly. And because of all the things on the bottom, all of the riverbed, all of the rocks, probably some boulders down there, the seraphim couldn't fly through because of everything there. It was dangerous. You could get stuck or caught on those. But Nephel is able to get through because of how much smaller her wings. So is it a truly miraculous story that she is able to get Miriam to the other side and that they're able to have the water come crashing down right after them so that it washes away the enemy force. And so because of Azriel, Cassian, and Rhys have kind of adopted the Nephel philosophy, is what they call it, which is essentially it's a reminder that what we think is our greatest weakness can sometimes be our biggest strength, and that the most unlikely person can alter the course of history. So I feel like this has a little bit of foreshadowing because the whole reason that they're teaching Feyre to fly is in the off chance that she is in a life or death situation, and flying means foreshadowing because that is exactly what happened. So yes, he ends it by saying, so we'll train until the last possible day because we never know if just one extra hour of training could make the difference. I don't have a whole lot underlined through the last couple pages of this chapter because it is an explicit section of the chapter. Long story short, Feyre is incredibly sore and bruised and bandaged from all of the training that she's done the last couple of days, the flying lessons and everything. So Rhys gives her a nice massage to help her relax. It is a very nice massage if you catch. But I think it's really funny because Rhys mentions like they still have that draw to each other, that desire for each other. And we talked in the second read to when they first accepted the mate bond, that there was that period where they needed to be together physically, and that desire was something that could potentially last for a while. And we're now, like 2 months down the road, and Rhys is still feeling that desire. And he's like, I don't know if I can handle this for the next 1,000 years, so it's going to need to calm down at some point. He's like, because my productivity is going to plummet if this is the case. And it just makes me laugh. Like, it's such a Rhys-Anne thing. And I love the way he ends this chapter because she finally gets to experience that certain spot on the wings that is very sensitive and what it can do when touched at the right spot or at the right time. So they have their little physical time together, get to enjoy each other after long, hard days of, which is exactly what Feyre realized that she actually wanted, was to have days where she worked so hard that she came home so tired and then was able to spend the evening with that person that she loved and then fall into a sleep where she didn't have night. So she is finally getting what she realized that she actually wanted. That is the end of that section of chapters.
I love the inklings of what we're going to learn for Elaine, though. I think you have a good mindset. And I think because we're all looking at her with a different perspective, clearer. And Elaine, I did write off very early. Nesta, but I did write off Elaine. And so I think it's interesting now for those not so Nesta haters that kind of coming around after the Sarah podcast. Now I'm over here like, okay, we're doing our podcast. And as we're getting through stuff, I'm going, okay, maybe I'm giving her more. Maybe she's more than just pretty flighty girl. Maybe she's got depth that we don't, because we get such heavy perspectives of Feyre and Nesda because of their conflict, where there was never conflict with Elaine. So she's just, oh, the sweet sister, the quiet one, and now, oh, maybe she's quiet and gentle because she's got so much. I don't know. I feel like that a lot of their gifts are given based on who they were as humans, a little bit, at least within who they were, the fighter, the protector, that sort of thing. And so I'm wondering if she had a lot more that she saw or heard going and just didn't share it with her sister. You know what
She even tells nobody saw me except, as in even her sisters didn't see her. It was only Grace, her now no longer. So I agree completely. I think there's a lot more to her that now that we're doing this reread and really deep diving into it, we're seeing those hits, but we still don't know the full until we get her perspective. Right? Era's more on Azriel. Yep. Lucien, we're like, we don't care one way or the other, but the Firebird, I want that whole story. Yeah.
We'll hit pause there for today. Thanks for tuning in and following along with our deep dive. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you're listening. Leave us a rating or review and let us know your favorite moments or thoughts on the new theories from this episode. If you're reading ahead, good luck avoiding the temptation to finish the whole book. Until next time, happy reading.